Let's say hypothetically you were called to this case in Moscow, Idaho. Four, as my mother said, college students just savagely stabbed to death in the early morning hours of a Sunday night back on December.
Now it's 4.5 weeks.
November 13th, I believe it was. What do you do when you arrive on scene? Walk us through your process of getting to a crime scene.
A lot of times I don't want them taking me to the scene. I want to take them to the scene because I want to be the antenna. I want my antenna very strong. So to give you one that I did, maybe that'll help understand.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Princess Doe in 81 or 80 was the very first missing person child to be put into the afterwards. But when the bill came to pass, the Exploited and Missing Children's Bureau. She was the first entry. It was in New Jersey, about 45 minutes from where I lived at the time. I didn't know anything other than Princess Doe was an unidentified body. Didn't know where, didn't know what. But because I knew some sheriff's investigator I worked with on missing children and found them and things of that sort, he asked me if I wanted to come to the task force and meet the prosecutor, and because they didn't have a real police force, they had a captain of homicide prosecutor kind of thing. It was a little weird. But anyhow, I go and I meet Captain David Heater, who was so nice, and all the rest of the task force. And they said, what would you like to do? I said, I want you to put me in the car with you, and I'm going to point you to where I want to go. And they said, fine. And I said, go left, go straight. Oh, pull up to this little strip mall. There's a pizza place and there's a supermarket right next door. And I said, I've got to get into the pizza place. So they go in with me and they go to the counter and they say, what would you like to order? And I said, I don't want to order anything. I know whoever I'm looking for was here and her murderer. And she was in the next place in the supermarket. So that means she was alive then. Okay. And so I'm walking and I'm getting a look. I said, okay, let's go. I want to go about a half a mile up and I want to go to the right. Well, half a mile up to the right is a cemetery. I said, okay, can you take the road in and I'll tell you when to stop. So we take the road in almost to the end. I said, pull out, stop. I go to the ravine right there. And I said, you found her body right there. They said, yes, we did. I said, okay, now I can go back with you and talk because I see him taking either hammer or a big stone to her head so that the parts of her head were crushed. They said, yes. I said, okay, let's go. So we go back to the town, the county or whatever seat. And I said, do you have any kind of evidence? I know she wore something, not clothes because that's in forensics, but you had something else. And they said, yes, a little necklace. I said, may I hold it now that it's been tested? And they said, sure. So I went back. Not understanding, I am telling you the process is that nothing else is going on in me. Nothing. I trust what comes. I can only say absolute faith. So I sit down and I, given a private room, I asked for, and I sat there and I imagined I'm talking to her. And I know she's a kind of runaway, not from our state, and she's very upset. So I imagine I have a conversation with her and she doesn't want to go near who the killer was because it was horrible. And she hints that there were two of them and that she had been brutalized, sexually brutalized. I said, okay, got it. So I come back and I said, okay, there's a guy named John, last name begins with an R, single syllable. He's got a scar on his right cheek and a Western belt buckle because that's all I could see through her murder. I can picture who she's seeing. Take notes. Nothing happened. Zero. No one ever identified her then at all for years and years and years, decades. 5 years later, a woman walks in my office and she says nothing. And I look at her and I said, you just had a horrible, brutal murder of a family member. Your sister? Yes, yesterday, I think it was. So I said, well, here are my references. If you want, I cannot tell you anything I see. I have to speak to local people handling it. I'm not telling you. She said, okay. So she goes back and who's calling me? David Heater, Captain David Heater. So I go back out and I go with him to the fresh crime scene. And that's where I see the vacuum and the cord. And I know how she died. I go to the bedroom where she was killed. I walk into everything, and it's in the book, The Life of a Psychic Detective. I walk in, it's a first floor, and then there's an upstairs apartment. And I said, your murderer is upstairs. First name, John. Last name begins with an R. Scar on the right cheek. Western belt buckle, 5 years later. And they said, do you remember ever saying that before? I said, no, but he's a serial killer. Well, go forward. Without going into all the details of that, I described how he killed her, that he killed her with a hammer, that the hammer was put in a swamp. I come back out. The person they thought killed her was her boyfriend. I said, absolutely not. They said, but we polygraphed the guy, John Reese, who lives upstairs. I said, he's the killer. Go back and look at him. But he doesn't have a scar, David said. I said, you're wrong. Go look. So next thing I know, they look, they bring him back in because autopsies back then weren't done yet. And he fully confesses because they now know. They polygraphed him to 11:30, I think, at night, or 12. She was killed after 1. And I kept saying, your polygrapher is wrong. She was killed much later. And so it was all proven out. He fully confessed on video. He just died in October in prison for life. And I'm still very close to the family, all of them.